Welcome to State Line Rig. Today, we are exploring the entire history of Florida, from mastodons to Miami. 12,000 years before anyone called it Florida, a hunter creeps past a mastodon twice the height of a house. One wrong move, and he's dead. This is not the Florida of beaches and theme parks. This is a cold, dry peninsula, stalked by giant ground sloths and mammoths, and the people who lived here had to outthink monsters just to see tomorrow. Stick around, because the story of how this dangerous wilderness became the Sunshine State is stranger, bloodier, and more chaotic than anything you learned in school. The land before Florida. Around 14,000 BCE, the first people arrive. We call them Paleo-Indians, and they're nomads, following herds of massive prehistoric animals across a peninsula that looked nothing like today's Florida. It was cooler, drier, and twice as wide, since so much of the world's water was still locked in glacial ice. These early Floridians hunted with stone-tipped weapons and gathered whatever the land offered, and their willingness to adapt on the fly is exactly what kept them alive. Then the ice began to melt. Sea levels rose, the peninsula shrank, and by around 7500 BCE, the climate flipped into something warmer and wetter, much closer to the Florida we know. The giant beasts vanished, so people turned to rivers and coastlines, fishing and hunting smaller game. Communities put down roots. And soon, materials from hundreds of miles away, like copper from the Appalachians, started showing up in Florida. Trade had arrived. By 500 BCE, villages were growing into something more organized. Farming took hold, spiritual practices deepened, and dugout canoes carved from cypress trunks turned rivers into highways. By the time the Mississippian period rolled around, Florida had powerful chiefs commanding large settlements plugged into a trade network stretching across the entire southeast. Everything was building towards something big. Nobody saw what was coming. Empires collide. April 1513. A Spanish ship crests the horizon carrying Juan Ponce de León. He names this unfamiliar coastline La Florida, and the indigenous people who'd lived here for over 10,000 years watch this stranger with equal parts curiosity and suspicion. That caution turns out to be justified, because peace never lasts. Ponce de León returns years later with settlers and livestock, gets wounded in a clash with locals, and dies from it. But the Spanish keep coming anyway. Expedition after expedition fails spectacularly. The Narvaez mission gets wrecked by storms, and Hernando de Soto marches deep into Florida's interior with a massive force and still can't plant a lasting settlement. Then, in 1565, Spanish Admiral Pedro Menéndez de Avilés shows up with a different mission: crush a French fort and claim Florida for good. He does exactly that, founding St. Augustine, which still stands today as the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the entire United States. From there, missions spread across the region, becoming centers of farming, craft, and trade that blended Spanish and native life, though coexistence was often strained by disease and conflicts between converts and those who resisted conversion entirely. British colonies to the north eventually began eyeing this Spanish territory hungrily, and the missions became irresistible targets. Raids intensified, settlements burned, and Spain scrambled to fortify what defenses it had left. Pressure mounted for decades until, in 1763, worn down by the 7 Years' War, Spain simply handed Florida over to Britain in exchange for getting Havana back. The British split the territory into East and West Florida and got straight to work, building plantations, mapping land, and pouring money into agriculture and defense. Indigo, rice, and sugarcane transformed the region into an agricultural engine, while towns, schools, and churches sprang up to anchor a growing colonial population. The British also worked to forge alliances with native tribes through treaties, though those promises weren't always honored, and resentment simmered beneath the surface. But this new order wouldn't last either. When the American Revolution erupted in 1775, Florida stayed loyal to the crown, becoming a strategic military hub and a refuge for loyalists fleeing the rebelling colonies to the north. Then the war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, and in a diplomatic twist, Britain handed Florida right back to Spain. A nation-takes-shape Spanish rule returned in 1783, but the young United States was growing fast and had its eyes on Florida. Settlers poured in, tensions with native tribes intensified, and out of this chaos emerged the Seminole, a resilient people formed from displaced tribes uniting under shared struggle. Leaders like Osceola became symbols of resistance as the United States pushed harder and harder for control. The pressure finally broke Spain. In 1819, the Adams-Onis Treaty handed Florida to the United States, with America paying $5 million to settle outstanding claims and giving up its own claims to parts of Texas in the bargain. Brutal wars against the Seminole followed across several decades, filled with guerrilla warfare in swampland that favored the defenders but still cost countless lives on both sides. Treaties were signed and broken, and leaders like Osceola, who sought peace, were betrayed and imprisoned anyway. Many Seminole were eventually forced west along the same devastating path as the Trail of Tears, though a determined few stayed behind and preserved their culture against incredible odds, and their descendants remain in Florida to this day. By 1845, Florida officially became the 27th state, and the news sparked celebrations across the territory. And here's where things get darker. Statehood came wrapped in plantation economics, with cotton, timber, and sugar exports fueling the economy, and slavery became deeply entrenched in Florida's social and financial fabric. When Abraham Lincoln won the presidency in 1860, fear and outrage swept the South, and Florida delegates voted to secede just months later, joining the Confederacy in 1861. No major battles were fought on Florida soil, but the state fed troops, salt, beef, and cotton to the Confederate war effort, running Union naval blockades until the whole cause collapsed in 1865. Reconstruction, and the rebirth nobody expected. Here's the part most people skip. After the war, formerly enslaved Floridians stepped into freedom, education, and even political office for the first time. But that progress triggered a violent backlash. Citrus groves stretched across the state. Henry Flagler's railroads connected remote towns to the rest of the country. The Florida we know today. The civil rights movement found a battleground in St. Augustine, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. helped push desegregation forward. Meanwhile, waves of immigration reshaped the state's identity entirely. Cuban refugees built Little Havana into a cultural powerhouse. Families from Haiti, Jamaica, Colombia, and across Latin America added new languages, cuisines, and traditions, turning Florida into one of the most culturally layered states in the country. By the year 2000, that diversity was undeniable, and Florida's political weight was undeniable too, especially when a razor-thin presidential recount put the entire state under a microscope. Today, Florida is a study in contrasts. World-class universities and booming tech hubs sitting alongside one of the most fragile ecosystems on the planet. The Everglades face restoration battles. Coral reefs fight bleaching. Rising seas chip away at the coastline year after year. And yet Florida keeps reinventing itself. From Wynwood street art to Ultra Music Festival, from championship sports teams to a music scene that launched global stars. It's a state built by mastodons and missionaries, pirates and presidents, refugees and retirees, constantly rewritten by whoever arrives next. If this journey through Florida's history has you thinking about visiting yourself, check the description below. We've linked some of the best travel gear and booking deals for exploring St. Augustine, the Everglades, and everywhere else we covered today. Florida's story isn't finished. Between rising seas and rapid growth, the next chapter is still being written right now. If this journey through 12,000 years of history opened your eyes to a side of Florida you never knew existed, hit subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next. Drop a comment telling me which era surprised you the most. I read every single one.